Why is it that the least qualified people are often the most confident? Why do the loudest voices in the room tend to come from those who understand the least? If you've ever found yourself locked in a conversation with someone who speaks with absolute certainty about something they clearly don't understand, you're not alone. Whether it's a coworker giving clueless suggestions in a meeting, or a family member who becomes an overnight expert after watching one YouTube video, we've all seen it. And no, it's not just arrogance. There's something deeper going on here. It all starts with one of the most bizarre crimes ever committed, and a man armed with nothing but lemon juice. In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler walked into two banks in broad daylight and robbed them. No disguise, no mask, nothing. Just his face out in the open. He smiled for the security cameras, took the money, and strolled out like it was the most normal thing in the world. A few hours later, the police showed up at his door. When they arrested him, Wheeler was genuinely shocked. "But I wore the juice," he said. Yes, you heard that right. He had rubbed lemon juice on his face, convinced that it would make him invisible to surveillance cameras. His logic? Lemon juice can be used as invisible ink, so surely it would make his face disappear too. This case caught the attention of psychologist David Dunning. He wasn't just amused, he was fascinated. How could someone be so wrong? And yet so sure they were right. Dunning teamed up with graduate student Dunning-Kruger to dig deeper. What they found has since become one of the most important and disturbing psychological discoveries of our time. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and it describes a strange paradox. People with low ability or knowledge in a domain are the most likely to overestimate their skills. And the scariest part? They don't even know they're doing it. Dunning and Kruger ran a series of studies where participants were tested on grammar, logic, and humor. After each test, they were asked to estimate how well they did compared to others. The results were staggering. The worst performers, the bottom 25%, thought they had done better than 62% of their peers. In reality, they had only outperformed about 12%. Meanwhile, the top performers, the people who actually did well, underestimated themselves, believing they were closer to average. Let that sink in. The less you know, the more likely you are to think you know it all. And the more you know, the more aware you become of how much you still have to learn. This is the trap. It's not just ignorance, it's confident ignorance. It's a blind spot so powerful that people trapped inside it don't even know it's there. As Dunning himself said, the first rule of the Dunning-Kruger Club is you don't know you're a member. And here's the kicker. That means all of us, at some point in some area of life, have fallen into this trap. Let's be honest. It's easy to laugh at MacArthur Wheeler. But here's the uncomfortable truth. His logic, while absurd in form, reflects something many of us do in function. Because the real danger of the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't the outliers. It's how quietly and frequently it operates in everyday life. It doesn't show up just in ridiculous bank heists or clueless internet rants. It shows up in job interviews, team meetings, politics, medicine, and even in how we argue with friends or navigate social media. And most of the time, it's invisible to the person experiencing it. The core of the problem is something psychologists call a metacognitive deficiency. In simple terms, we're bad at judging our own knowledge. And ironically, the less we know about a topic, the worse we are at realizing how little we know. You don't know what you don't know. And that, right there, is the trap. Let's break it down. The first mechanism is what researchers call unknown unknowns. When we learn just a tiny bit about a subject, we feel empowered, like we've unlocked a secret, but we don't yet see how vast the landscape really is. A beginner in investing reads one book and suddenly starts giving people advice on their portfolios. Someone watches a documentary on psychology and thinks they understand the human mind better than a trained therapist. We've all seen this. Some of us have been this. Second, there's confirmation bias. Once we form a belief about our abilities, we start cherry-picking evidence to support it. We remember our wins, rationalize our failures, and reinterpret neutral feedback as validation. This makes it incredibly hard to self-correct, because we're not just bad at something, we're confidently bad at it. And third, we naturally tend to overestimate ourselves, something psychologists call the above-average effect. Ask people if they're better than average drivers, more ethical than the average person, or better communicators than their peers. And the majority will say yes. Statistically impossible, but psychologically common. It's not just a matter of ego. It's a flaw in how our brain processes self-evaluation. And this illusion of competence doesn't just affect novices. It protects them from realizing they're novices in the first place. The Dunning-Kruger curve maps this perfectly. It starts with a sharp spike in confidence, what many call Mount Stupid. This is where people know just enough to feel smart, but not enough to realize how little they actually understand. Then comes the Valley of Despair, where deeper learning begins, and confidence crashes as awareness grows. And only after consistent effort, learning, and feedback do we start climbing the slope of enlightenment, where confidence and competence finally begin to align. So, what does this mean for you? It means the moment you feel absolutely certain about something, especially if you've only recently started learning about it, is probably the moment you should stop and ask yourself, what am I missing here? Because knowledge isn't just about adding facts. It's about subtracting illusions. And the most dangerous illusion of all is thinking you're immune to this effect. When David Dunning and Justin Kruger published their landmark study in 1999, they weren't just pointing out that some people are overconfident. That's an old idea. What they revealed was much more disturbing and much more relevant today than ever before. Their research showed that incompetence doesn't just lead to mistakes. It leads to blindness to those mistakes. In other words, the very skills you need to do something well are the same skills you need to judge whether you're doing it well in the first place. If you don't have those skills, you're flying blind. But you feel like you're flying just fine. And that's not a rare glitch. That's a universal vulnerability. In their study, Dunning and Kruger gave participants tests on humor, grammar, and logic, and then asked them to estimate how well they performed. Here's what they found. The bottom 25% of performers consistently overestimated their results, thinking they were above average. The top performers, the people who objectively did the best, underestimated themselves, believing they were closer to the middle. This isn't just a curiosity. It's a cognitive pattern that affects education, leadership, science, politics, medicine, literally every field where people have to evaluate their own competence. But here's the kicker. The more complex our world becomes, the more dangerous this effect gets. Think about it. We now live in a time when information is more accessible than ever. With a smartphone and a few minutes of Googling, anyone can read about quantum physics, vaccines, or global economics. But here's the catch. Reading about a topic is not the same as understanding it, and surface-level knowledge creates the perfect storm for the Dunning-Kruger effect to thrive. You read one blog post on nutrition, and suddenly you're questioning the medical advice of a trained doctor. You watch a 10-minute YouTube video on inflation, and suddenly you're dissecting central bank policy with full confidence. It's not stupidity. It's a mismatch between how much people think they understand and how much they actually do. And the worst part? Our culture often rewards this behavior. In the age of social media, confident statements go viral. Certainty gets clicks. People don't want to watch a nuanced expert cautiously explain all the variables. They want bold claims, simple answers, and someone who speaks like they have all the facts. So what happens? The loudest voices rise to the top, even when they're dead wrong. That's why the Dunning-Kruger effect matters more now than ever. It's not just about individuals misjudging themselves. It's about a system that amplifies the confident and silences the humble. It's about a world where the illusion of competence spreads faster than actual expertise. And if we don't learn to recognize this effect, not just in others, but in ourselves, we're not just misinformed. We're vulnerable. There's a strange paradox in the world of knowledge. The more someone knows, the less certain they tend to sound. You've probably noticed this. True experts often use phrases like, "It depends," "I might be wrong," or "We need more data." Meanwhile, someone with zero credentials talks like they've cracked the code of the universe, confidently, loudly, and without a hint of doubt. So what's going on here? Why do the people who know the most often seem hesitant while those who know the least act like they've figured it all out? The answer lies in something Dunning and Kruger hinted at, but which psychologists have studied even further. The more competent you become, the more aware you are of what you don't know. Let's break this down. When someone begins learning a new subject, their confidence shoots up quickly. This is the Mount Stupid we talked about earlier. The peak where people feel smart because they've just acquired a little knowledge. It feels empowering. You think, "I get this." But then comes a crash. As they learn more, they realize how vast and complex the subject really is. Suddenly, that confidence disappears, replaced by doubt, humility, even imposter syndrome. This is where true learning begins. Experts live on the other side of that valley. They've climbed the slope of enlightenment. And what they've gained along the way, besides skill, is perspective. They understand nuance. They recognize the exceptions. They've made mistakes, corrected themselves, and learned that no model is perfect. This is why the best minds are often the most cautious. Richard Feynman, one of the most brilliant physicists in history, once said, "I would rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned." That's not false modesty. That's intellectual honesty. Because the more you understand a system, the more you see its fragility, its complexity, its moving parts. And you also become painfully aware of how easy it is to get things wrong. This mindset has a name: intellectual humility. And it's not weakness. It's a strength. It means being open to new evidence, willing to change your mind, and aware that certainty is often a sign of ignorance, not insight. But here's the twist. In today's world, humility doesn't always pay off. We live in a culture where confidence is currency, where people are rewarded not for being right, but for sounding right. And that means experts, the ones who hesitate, who qualify their statements, who acknowledge complexity, often get drowned out by louder, simpler voices. That's a huge problem, because it creates a dangerous illusion, where people start to believe that being loud means being right, and that uncertainty means incompetence. The truth is almost the opposite. Doubt, when it's grounded in knowledge, is a sign of wisdom, and certainty, when it's divorced from depth, is a red flag. So next time you hear someone speak with total confidence about something complex, especially if they're new to the subject, don't be impressed. Be suspicious. And if you feel a little unsure while learning something new, that's not failure. That's growth. That means you've stepped off Mount Stupid. and started walking the path toward real understanding. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just a funny psychological quirk. It's not just about a few people being overconfident in casual conversations. It's a cognitive bias that, when scaled across society, becomes deeply destructive. Let's start with politics. We live in a time where some of the most vocal political opinions come from people with the least understanding of policy, economics, or history. They speak in absolutes, offering black and white solutions to complex problems. And they do it with conviction. Meanwhile, those who actually study these issues for a living tend to speak cautiously. They admit uncertainty, acknowledge trade-offs, and resist easy answers. And guess who gets the spotlight? In many democracies, confidence often trumps competence, not just among voters, but among candidates themselves. The louder and more certain someone is, the more leadership qualities they appear to have, even if their understanding is shallow at best. This leads to what some political scientists call epistemic decay, a slow erosion of the quality of public discourse and decision-making. Now let's talk about medicine. Imagine a medical student who's only halfway through their training, but feels confident enough to make life or death decisions. Or worse, someone who's never studied medicine at all, but read 5 blog posts and now tells others to ignore their doctors. It happens more than you think. One study found that medical students with the lowest clinical skills were the most likely to overestimate their abilities. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, this effect exploded into the public sphere. Suddenly, everyone became an epidemiologist. People with zero background in virology were confidently arguing with public health experts online, not just questioning policies, but outright dismissing them. It wasn't just misinformation. It was confident misinformation. And that's the most dangerous kind. Then we have the digital battlefield, social media. These platforms are the perfect breeding ground for the Dunning-Kruger effect. Why? Because they flatten the playing field. On Twitter or TikTok, your voice can go just as viral as a Nobel Prize winner's, even if you have no clue what you're talking about. Algorithms reward engagement, not accuracy. And what drives engagement? Strong opinions, delivered with confidence. This creates a massive problem. People can't easily tell the difference between someone who's genuinely knowledgeable and someone who's just loud. Over time, this distorts how we value expertise. It creates what researchers call an expertise crisis, where informed perspectives are drowned out by simplistic soundbites. And once that line between knowledge and noise is blurred, trust in real expertise begins to collapse. Even in the workplace, this effect plays out daily. Employees who are the least competent often rate their performance the highest, leading to overconfidence, poor decision-making, and resistance to feedback. Meanwhile, highly capable employees may stay quiet, doubting themselves or feeling overshadowed by louder colleagues. Over time, this creates what's known as a confidence cascade, where entire cultures begin to reward assertiveness over substance. And suddenly, your leadership team is filled not with the most skilled people, but with the most self-assured. It's not hard to see how all of this creates real harm. When we mistake confidence for competence, society becomes more vulnerable to bad leadership, poor policy, pseudoscience, and division. So no, the Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just about inflated egos. It's about the structures we live in and how easily they can be hijacked by people who think they know, but really don't. So how do we escape this trap? How do we protect ourselves and others from the illusion of competence that the Dunning-Kruger effect creates? The answer isn't glamorous. It's not easy. And it definitely won't massage your ego. But it works. It starts with something most people avoid at all costs: brutal feedback. The only way to calibrate your self-perception with reality is to see yourself as others see you. And that requires exposing your work, your thoughts, and your abilities to people who are more experienced than you, and asking them to tell you the hard truth. No sugarcoating, no ego protection. That's painful. But it's also one of the most powerful tools for growth you'll ever find. Because feedback, real, honest, unfiltered feedback, is a mirror. And until you hold up that mirror, you're just guessing. You're relying on your own biased brain to assess itself. And, as we've seen, that's a losing game. But feedback alone isn't enough. You also need the mindset to receive it. And that's where intellectual humility comes in. Intellectual humility means recognizing that your perspective is limited. It means admitting, I could be wrong. It means understanding that confidence should be proportional to competence, not a substitute for it. That doesn't mean walking around in constant self-doubt. It means holding your beliefs loosely, being curious, updating your views as new evidence comes in. Ironically, the people who do this, who question themselves, who say, I don't know when appropriate, are often perceived as less capable in a world that worships certainty. But in reality, they're the ones you should trust the most. Another powerful strategy is deliberate practice. Not just doing things over and over, but targeting your weaknesses with focused effort and immediate feedback. This is how musicians, athletes, and surgeons develop mastery. Not through repetition alone, but through correction. Deliberate practice builds not just skill, but self-awareness. Because with each rep, you're learning what works and what doesn't. You're shrinking the gap between how good you think you are and how good you actually are. And finally, there's metacognition. Thinking about your thinking. This sounds abstract, but it's actually very practical. It means stopping to reflect. How confident am I right now? What evidence do I have to back that up? Have I considered opposing views? Could I be falling for the illusion of competence? This habit, questioning your own certainty, is like an internal compass. It doesn't eliminate the Dunning-Kruger effect entirely, but it helps you catch it before it leads you off a cliff. Because the truth is, no one is immune. No matter how smart, educated, or experienced you are, there will always be domains where you overestimate yourself. And that's okay, as long as you're willing to find out where you're wrong. In fact, that's where real growth happens. Not when you prove yourself right, but when you discover you were wrong, and update accordingly. So if you want to rise above the noise, if you want to avoid becoming just another loud voice on Mount Stupid, seek feedback. Embrace discomfort. Question your certainty. And most of all, stay humble enough to keep learning. So now you know, the trap is real. It has a name, it has a shape, and it's sneaky enough to catch anyone, including you. The Dunning-Kruger effect isn't just about other people. It's not just that guy on Facebook arguing about politics, or that coworker who thinks they're a genius in every meeting. It's about you, me, all of us. Because here's the final twist. The people most trapped by this illusion are also the least likely to realize it. That's what makes it so dangerous. It's not a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of awareness of that lack. And that brings us to the most important question of all. How do you get out? How do you escape Mount Stupid and move toward real wisdom? It starts with accepting a hard truth. Certainty is seductive, but usually false. The world is complicated. Problems are messy. Answers are rarely black and white. And the more someone tries to sell you a simple, absolute truth, the more you should pause and ask, where's the nuance? Next, you build the habit of self-questioning, not self-doubt in the destructive sense, but the kind of curiosity that says, I feel confident. But do I have reason to be? What haven't I considered yet? Who knows more about this than I do? You also surround yourself with people who challenge you, not flatter you. You create a personal culture where changing your mind isn't a weakness. It's a flex. You make feedback part of your growth, not a threat to your ego. And, maybe most importantly, you practice being okay with not knowing. We live in a world that rewards fast answers. That confuses volume with value. But the wisest people, across fields, generations, and cultures, have always shared one thing in common: a deep awareness of how much they don't know. That's what Socrates meant when he said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." Not literally nothing, but that your knowledge is always partial, always evolving. Because here's the real magic. The moment you admit you don't know everything is the moment you become teachable. And that is when real learning begins. So the next time you feel 100% sure of something, slow down, double check, ask questions. Find someone smarter than you and listen. Really listen. And if you ever find yourself climbing Mount Stupid, don't panic. Just remember, the goal isn't to never be wrong. It's to recognize it faster, to learn quicker, to move beyond certainty and into understanding. Because in the end, it's not the loudest who change the world. It's the ones willing to question their own noise. You're not just watching content anymore. You're becoming the architect. Let's go.